Finding Hope, Grief, Healing, and Recovery After Suicide, featuring Lisa Sugarman. What happens when the questions never get answered? In this powerful episode of Talking Addiction Recovery podcast, author, mental health advocate, and suicide loss survivor Lisa Sugarman sits down to discuss her book, Surviving, Finding Hope After Suicide Loss. Lisa shares a deeply personal story behind the book, including the unique and meaningful role her mother played in helping bring the project to life. Together, they explore the complexities of grief after suicide, the search for answers that may never come, and the reality that healing is not about moving on, but learning how to move forward while carrying loss with us. The conversation examines the unique challenges faced by those grieving a suicide, including guilt, shame, unanswered questions, and the ongoing struggle to find meaning after tragedy. Lisa discusses why she intentionally integrated practical tools, resources, and coping strategies throughout her book, providing readers with support alongside her personal story. Lisa challenges the common notion that time alone heals grief. Instead, she explores the value of community, connection, support groups, therapy, mindfulness, journaling, and other tools that can help individuals navigate loss and build resilience. The episode concludes with a discussion of Lisa's Help Hub, a free online resource directory designed to connect individuals, families, clinicians, and communities with trusted mental health crisis and grief support resources. Whether you have experienced suicide loss personally, support someone who has, or work in the helping profession, this conversation offers compassion, practical guidance, and a reminder that hope can exist alongside grief. Healing from suicide loss is not about finding all the answers. It is about learning to live alongside grief, building support, accessing helpful tools, and discovering that hope can remain present even in the midst of profound loss.
This is Talking Addiction and Recovery, the podcast talking, you guessed it, all about addiction and recovery. Join your host, licensed professional counselor Andrew J. Schreier, as he and his guests break down recovery topics with raw honesty, delving into niche conversations around the topics of substance abuse, mental health, and gambling. We intend to meet individuals where they are on their own personal journey of recovery, with dignity, respect, and compassion. We'll do more than talk addiction and recovery. We'll explore it. We're glad you've joined us. Here with today's episode, your host, Andrew Schreier.
Our guest on this episode is Lisa Sugarman, who is a 3-time suicide loss survivor, author, and leading mental health advocate. She's a crisis counselor with the Trevor Project and a storyteller with the National Alliance on Mental Illness, also known as NAMI, using her lived experience to help others heal through connection and community. She's also the founder of the Help Hub, a free online platform offering inclusive mental health resources, crisis support, and treatment options for every community. Lisa co-hosts the Survivors podcast and is the author of Surviving, Finding Hope After Suicide Loss, and 3 previous books on parenting and embracing our perfect imperfectness. A safe place facilitator and board member with Samaritan South Coast, Lisa's work has been featured on the Mental Health Television Network and on platforms like Calmary, Recovery.com, Healthline Parenthood, Grown and Flown, Today Parents, The Washington Post, and Psychology Today. She lives in Wrights, just north of Boston. You can learn more about Lisa in the podcast notes. Before we dive in this episode, I want to remind listeners that for some licensed clinicians and certified behavioral health specialists, some of the podcast episodes are continuing education approved. We have gone through the process of getting education approved through IPGGC, NASW Wisconsin chapter, and NADAC, meaning you can earn CEUs just by listening to select podcast episodes and completing a short post-test. No conference, no webinar registration, no membership, no paid platform. The podcast is expanded to become a platform for continuing education, all free for providers. To learn more, visit www.andrewjschreier.com for everything you need. All right, let's get into today's episode with Lisa. On this episode of Talking Addiction and Recovery podcast, we want to welcome Lisa Sugarman. Thanks for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me, Andrew. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I can't wait to talk about your book and all the work that you do around a topic that is so important and difficult to talk about, but I think we're going to find ways to make that uh, more of a safe space for people. Before we do, though, can you just give audience listeners a little bit of a background about yourself?
Yeah, there's a lot of intersectionality with me and with my story and with what I do. And I guess first and foremost, yeah, I'm a content creator in terms of what I do professionally. You mentioned I wrote a book recently. I've written a bunch of books. This one is, uh, for me, I guess, the most profound body of work that I've ever produced. I'm also a survivor, a multiple survivor of suicide loss. I am a crisis counselor with the Trevor Project. I work with the National Alliance on Mental Illness as one of their storytellers here in Boston. I also work with Samaritans. You and I were talking a little offline about work that I do as a facilitator for grief groups for suicide loss survivors. And I'm a mental health advocate. So all of those things somehow come together to allow me to work and create content and reach people within this space of mental health advocacy and suicide prevention and awareness and grief advocacy.
And your recent publication, which was Surviving, Finding Hope After Suicide Loss, it was, I can't wait to talk about it. And that's what we're going to focus on and other things because it is always a subject that comes up in like addiction, mental health, and therapy and counseling, but it usually becomes something that is like an afterthought or a part that comes maybe later. It's rarely what I've seen is the main focus or like something that we are going to spend a lot of time diving into. And then because I've got a bunch of books back there where some people talked about like suicide or attempts or loss, but it was never like a core theme. It was never like a focus. And then here's this book that covers the entire thing. So you mentioned you've written other books. Where does this
Mhm.
fall in line with the other work that you've done or other things you've published, knowing the impact and meaning behind such a topic?
Well, to answer that question, I have to go back a little just for context, for your context, and also for the folks who are listening. So I've been a writer most of my life, almost all of my professional life, and I was in the parenting space, writing in the parenting space for at least a decade, and wrote a parenting books, really all kind of focusing on raising perfectly imperfect kids and being perfectly imperfect parents and maintaining that work-life balance. Like that was my lane. That's where I was. I was raising my kids at the time, and I had a column for many years, a syndicated column that really primarily focused on raising kids and kind of maintaining that life. And then this is a part of my story that I'm sure we'll talk about because it's the reason for this book, the newest book. I discovered after 35 years that my father had actually taken his life. So I don't know how much you want to dive into that piece of it early on in this conversation. So give me the green light if you
Yeah,
want me
go
to
ahead. Green
go
light.
ahead and
Yeah.
explain. Okay. So when I was 10 years old, I'm an only child. When I was 10 years old, my dad, who was an otherwise incredibly healthy, super vibrant, energetic man, died very suddenly. And my mother told me that he had died of a heart attack. This was in 1978. My dad, along with being super healthy and super active, was a very big smoker. And I knew that heart attacks and heart disease ran in the family. Even as a young kid, I knew that because we had relatives who had died on his side from heart attacks. So when she gave me that narrative of how he had passed away, I had no reason to question it. I had no reason to disbelieve it. So that's what I lived with. And that's what I believed for 35 years. And then, very much by accident, when I was 45, the same age that my dad was when he passed away, I discovered the truth very much by accident. Random conversation with a woman who I hadn't seen in a long time, and she made a very unusual comment, wondering if my kids, we were just catching up, wondering if my kids had had any of the same mental illness dad had had. I didn't know what she was talking about. I had no idea where it was coming from. And when I asked my mother about it shortly after that, it just fell out of my mouth. I asked her if my father had been depressed before he died. She said yes. And then before I even knew I was asking the question, I asked her if he had taken his own life. And she said yes. So that really blew me up. I mean, I was very much a parenting writer and doing all of that, the scope of that kind of work in everything that I did. And then all of a sudden, everything shut down. My life just imploded. And it took me a number of years to really kind of be able to process what was now the new reality, the new truth,
And the
what it
loss
meant to be a.
again. This was another. You described that as this was another like losing again. Like
Yeah,
this
I've
was
lost my father
another.
twice.
Right. I don't think that's
Mhm.
ever talked about enough that like those experiences create, it's like this is repeating it and or not even repeating it, but it's a new version of the loss because now you're hearing about things you didn't know about, but it was going through that whole thing
Mhm.
again.
Oh, yeah, it started me right back. It kind of just rewound the clock. It was like day one, minute one, all over again. But now I was a grown woman. I was an adult. I was married. Dave and I had been married for 20 years at that point. This came out 13 years ago, but at that time I was a married mom of two with two teenage daughters. And all of a sudden I'm learning that my own father, who never presented in any other way but being joyful and loving life and being super present and loving, all of a sudden he had mental illness that we didn't know that he was masking. He was depressed, and we had absolutely no idea. And it changed everything. It kind of overwrote all my history in the blink of an eye. I was in just such a deep, dark place of grieving that and just trying to understand it. There's a lot of grappling with what was really happening. Was that true? How could that possibly be true? And it was. And then it was just kind of assimilating it, I guess, into my life because now I had these parallel narratives. I had the dad that I knew, and then I had the dad that I clearly did not know. And those two people needed to merge. And I'm still working on that. You know, over a decade later, I still actively work on that and the impact of that and the grief around that. And so it really shut me down for a long time. I didn't feel after a while like the work I was doing was authentic to the work that I needed to be doing, even though I didn't really know right after I found this out. I didn't really know what it meant for me. I had no intention of becoming an advocate. I had no intention of writing books about it. I had no intention of really speaking about it publicly. And I really just kind of sat in it in the only way that I could and just be in the moment for a very long time. And then it was my mom who thankfully is alive and well and incredibly supportive, and her words are in every chapter of this book. But she was the one who said, "You're going to write about this. I know I want you to feel like you can write about this, like you have my blessing to do this." I just said, "No, no, 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 Mom, no way. I can't do that. It's not in me right now. I don't have that capacity." And she said, "Well, I think maybe you will." And just eventually, as time went on and my heart opened up to different things and I started sharing and talking and learning what my story meant to other people who found points of connection within my story. That was what changed it for me. That's what put me on this path of founding the mental health platform that I started, the Help Hub, and getting involved as a crisis counselor with the Trevor Project and working with Samaritans and working with NAMI and writing this book, and now all of my work relates to all of these different things. And for the first time in my life, I feel like I'm in absolute alignment with what I'm supposed to be doing in the world. And it's a bizarre feeling to feel that way when I realize the reason why I feel that way is because I lost my dad. Like everything that I do right now comes from that. And I'm grateful that I can take whatever it is that I've learned, my own lived experience. I'm grateful I can take that and recycle it in a way that maybe hopefully helps some people find hope or find some healing or find just solid ground. But, it obviously sucks that the reason why I am doing all of this is because I lost my dad. But I mean, I'm choosing to feel positive about it and to believe that in some way he and I are actually doing this together. Like I really, this picture up behind me, if for anyone who's watching this video, it's the only picture of just the two of us that exists. And it has been sitting behind me on the shelf throughout this entire process, really, 6 years to write this book. And I feel like he's been there with me. We're doing it together. So and then including my mom in the book and then doing the audiobook myself and having my mother narrate her parts. It's honestly, Andrew, it's been like the first thing that we've done as a family in 47 years.
I wanted to ask about that because that stood out so uniquely about your book is that each chapter starts with from mom,
Mm-hmm.
and she describes some things. And throughout the book, you talk about, you know, your mom not telling you about it, and then you go through this, how can this be, versus then you talk about how you understand why she wouldn't. So your mom tells and shares some of what was going on and what was going on with her. And
Mm-hmm.
also like in the book, I think it was like chapter 12 or 13, where all of a sudden you talk about here it is, yeah, telling my daughters the truth. So we're
Mm-hmm.
also talking about like generational, right? Like what it was for your mom and then also what it was like for you, then also like that decision to tell your daughters. So in a way, this wasn't just even your story. This was about you, your dad, your mom, your children, other people. Uh, How important was that to be able to have like your mom's part shared in such like that unique way of every chapter starts with from her? Because
Mm.
that's usually not very common, or that's not something that is very typical when someone is kind of sharing their story, but yet every chapter starts out with um from mom.
Yeah, that singular part of this whole process has been ultimately the most gratifying thing about this book for me. For me, having my mom involved in the book like this was the greatest gift. I had such a sense of urgency, and I don't talk about this a lot. In fact, I'm not sure I've ever mentioned it on a podcast interview before. The life cycle of this book took 6 years. I think I mentioned that earlier, but which is very different for me. It's usually about a year to 18 months. I had such a sense of urgency to finish this book, not necessarily because I needed to get it out in the world. That was obviously a driver. The most important reason for me to finish it was to finish it so my mother could see it, so my mother could hold the book in her hands. And the interesting thing about the decision to put her in the book, that was not always the design. That was not always the plan. The plan was that it would be kind of these three pillars that the book is, which is that it's a memoir and it's a resource hub and a toolkit. It's only after I actually submitted the book to my editor, the manuscript was done, that I had the idea based on all the conversations that I had had with other people who always ask me about my story and ask me questions like, did you resent your mother? Do you have animosity toward her? What a lot of questions that I felt were better answered by my mom. And it got me really thinking about how valuable it would be to have her voice in the book. So I asked my publisher if they liked the idea. They loved it. I asked my mother if she'd be willing to talk about it. She said, absolutely. So I flew down to Florida, which is where she lives, and we just sat. We just sat for ages. And I came up with questions based on the content of each chapter that I thought would be something a reader might want to hear from her. And she was amazing. She answered every question with such incredible grace and love. And then we took it one step further when I learned that I was going to be narrating the book, which I had never done before. I said, well, there's nobody in the world who can narrate my mom's parts except my mom. And she had never done anything like that before. And my publisher said, look, let's just try it, see how it sounds. And she nailed it. She just nailed it. She did every quote in every chapter in her own words. And honestly, like Andrew, this book is And because of my children, it's generational. And so having her is the best part of the book for me.
That's incredible. And I just don't think that there's anything really like that. You know,
Mm.
yeah, it's you pull together, and then she's a part of it, like not just her words, but also then she's speaking it in your. So this wasn't even just one person sharing about it, but then it was, multiple people sharing and talking about it, which you just get the perspective of more people. And that brings me back to the beginning of your book. You talk about some numbers, and the thing that stood out was, right, this was like early on. It was, I learned that for every person who loses their life to suicide, 135 people are directly impacted by that loss. When you multiply that by more than 700,000 people who die by suicide each year worldwide, the number of people on this planet who are impacted by suicide is over 94 million every year. And you even write, and that statistic shook me. Like, we don't talk enough about the numbers of those impacted. You usually talk about the people who have died by suicide every year, the numbers in that way, but then you sort of take it to another step of the people who are impacted by that, and that number of 94 million. Then you have this book that shares your story. It shares your mom. It talks about it from her perspective. You talk about how then you decide to share it with your children. So to me, this casts such a wider reach to people impacted that I don't think we have enough conversations around those who are impacted by loss in this way.
Yeah, and that was the whole point. I mean, that one statistic, I go back over that over and over and over again. And whenever I have conversations with people, it's that one fact that I can share that really kind of puts this whole pandemic, which is what this is. It really truly is a pandemic. It puts it into perspective that either you're a coworker or you're a family member or you're a friend or you're somehow in somebody's orbit. And that number of 135 people, that's just an average. So it means that that number could be significantly larger, but that's just the average. And, this issue that we have with depression and mental illness and suicide, it transcends gender, it transcends your your economic status in the world, how much you make, where you live, what language you speak. These are universal issues that we're talking about, grief and loss and trauma and survival and finding hope. These are all universal issues that connect every single one of us. And I think I say very early on in the book, I think it might even be the first chapter or the introduction, that I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but if you haven't been touched by grief, you're going to be. And it's just the reality. That is just that's a human condition. It's part of being human. And I just think it's so important that we connect everybody who's dealing with this in whatever ways we can to make sure that this community stays together to support one another, because that's where I personally have found the most help, the most hope, the most, I guess, capacity to walk alongside this and have it with me all the time and not debilitate me. It's with the people that I connect with. It's with support groups. It's with my therapist. It's with other people who are on a different part of the continuum of their loss. Maybe it's someone who just started out. Maybe it's someone like me who's a long-term suicide loss survivor. Whatever it is, we're all navigating the same kinds of things. And when you do that with people, even if what you went through isn't exactly what someone else went through, you understand so many of those nuances that are attached to a thing like suicide, that look, it's the club that nobody wants to be in. I think I say that in the book too, and that's the truth. And yet, even though none of us wants to be in it, we'd rather be together than alone.
Your book had a beautiful balance of sitting with grief and moving with it. And I say that because you'd write about something, but then you would provide a tool or a resource for how to like sit with it or work with it. There's a lot of books where someone might tell their story and then you might get to like chapter the end where it says, like this is what I ended up doing. This is like you sort of read a whole lot of what was going on and what was happening. But your book had this like really beautiful balance of every single chapter, you talked about what was going on or talked about something about it, and then you right away provided some support. It's like I didn't have to get to the end to know how to start working with it. Was that designed on purpose? Was there some reasoning to not just say, "Hey, here's my story," and then part two is like how to do it or how to like get some resources. Yours was every single chapter was here's a part that I'm sharing, or here's a part of the story, and then here's something to sort of be able to sit with it or move with it. And I thought that was so profound and really that balance of I'm gonna sit with you with this grief, but also I'm gonna work with you right away to help with it. I thought that was just so incredible. Can you share a little bit about that importance versus like having it be a part one, part two, or I'm gonna share all the resources at the end? Like you learn right away in your
I,
book.
so, first of all, thank you. Second of all, I'm just sitting here processing that beautiful comment because it was very intentional. It was very much by design to include tools and strategies and resources throughout the book alongside the story. I didn't just want to write a memoir. It was more than writing a memoir. I know when I've read memoirs, and I've read many, many memoirs, they're such valuable, impactful, relatable stories in a lot of cases. I found myself at times, depending on what memoir it was, wishing that I had something more in that moment. Maybe it conjured up something for me. Maybe it unlocked something for me. Maybe it triggered something for me, and I didn't know what to do with it. So I was trying to think as a reader would think in that moment, what kind of like injecting my mother. I was trying to think of a reader's perspective. Okay, would my mother's perspective or experience be valuable? And I believed it would be. And clearly you said it was, and that just made my day too. But including tools and resources kind of peppered throughout the book based on each chapter was absolutely by design because when you're in the thick of reading something, especially something as heavy as suicide loss or grief, even if it's generalized grief and loss, and especially if you're in the early stages of that experience, you're lost. You don't know what to do. You don't have the capacity to figure out what to do. You need some kind of resource, some kind of guidance in that moment that doesn't require a lot of heavy lifting. And so that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to take whatever the content was. Most of the chapters in the book are really standalone chapters, with the exception of chapter 1 and 2, which is kind of a chronological. This is the first time I lost my father, and then this is the second time I lost my father. Aside from that, you can really pick up the book and almost read whatever chapter you want in any sequence that you want to read it. And so, based on whatever that subject matter was, I really worked hard with my editor to just really try and create a framework of resources that I thought would help people in that moment reading that passage or chapter. And so I really, really appreciate you calling that out and saying that you not only noticed it, but that you found that it was a good balance because that was the intention all along. And it's hard, you're never quite sure how something's going to land on someone, and especially when it's your story. Will it be useful? Will people find value in it? Will it help someone? And the same goes for structuring a book. Like, is this the right way to structure it? Does this thing really have the kind of value that I think in my head it has? And to hear that it did and that it does is incredibly validating. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, towards the end of the book, you talk about moving on versus moving forward. And when I got to that part, I was like, that's exactly what this book did, was it helped you move forward with the grief, but not move on from it. Not to say like this is over and now forget about it and how do you separate yourself from it? Like
No,
every part throughout the book was a compassionate space to sit with the grief, but then you also moved forward with it. So like being able to carry that grief versus thinking I'm just going to put it down and move away from it. So when I as I was reading the book and noticed that that's what it was doing, then I saw at the end when you talked about moving on versus moving forward, I was like, this is exactly like what the book was basically doing, was helping people to move forward with it as talking about it, as learning about it, as hearing that story. So the fact that it was done by design, I think that's super important. For me, that's what stood out about how to help people carry the grief, not let go of it, not pretend it didn't happen or to say, well, let's move on. Like it was how to carry through that. So I definitely appreciate it. Another thing I wanted to ask about one thing you did, which is really hard because we struggle with uncertainty, and part of your book talked about like how to deal with the things that go unanswered. And I thought you were willing to talk about that because I get that a lot in counseling for so many things. Like why me? Or why us? Why this have to happen? Why this person do this? And then when suicide happens, there's often a lot of those questions that go unanswered because and people are hoping that there's some explanation or something that comes along and says this is why this may happen. And for a lot of times there's so much of that why did this happen? And you addressed that. You purposely talked about how we deal with the unanswered. And that's such a difficult topic, and yet you weren't shy from having that conversation because we know the person sitting across from us or the person on the phone thinks there's going to be some relief if that can be answered. And I'm trying to find it right now because that you put this beautifully in a way of describing like the journey of what that goes through versus like having the answers. But do you remember that part where you talk about the
Yeah,
unanswered because it's so important, but I know a lot of people don't know how to have those conversations, don't know how to have that talk because it's unanswered.
yeah. It's a really tough part of suicide. It's one of those few qualities of suicide that separates it from generalized loss. And whenever I see generalized loss, meaning like a grandparent passed away of old age or someone died of cancer or a heart attack, like any loss is tragic and traumatic. I'm not trying to elevate suicide to a next level. It just so happens that there are characteristics of a suicide loss for a lot of people, myself included, that exist that just don't exist with generalized loss, like what you're talking about, like the why. Like, for instance, for me, and you've read the book, so you know, we don't fully know what my father's why was. We don't know. I mean, my father did leave a note. It was very short. It basically was an apology. It was an I love you, and it was an I can't go on. And that was it. So we don't know what led up to it. We have suspicions that a lot of it had to do with his family, which was that's a whole other conversation because my father's family was a very difficult, very, very difficult family, impossible to satisfy, very unloving, no nurturing. So we have a feeling we know, but we don't know exactly. Certainly don't know from him. So the why is a big part, the guilt is a big part, the shame is a big part, and those those parts don't usually exist outside of a suicide loss. So it just makes it so difficult to learn how to navigate and live alongside that kind of grief. But at the end of the day, we don't have a choice because the grief's not going anywhere. The grief may ebb and flow, which is what it does, but it doesn't go anywhere. And I wouldn't want it to go anywhere. I mean, to me, that's an indicator of this person was in my life, this person meant something to me. That grief tethers me to my dad. I say that throughout the book. It's just a complicated relationship that we all have with grief because we don't want it to be there, but it's always going to be there. And we have two choices. We either fight it or we learn to walk alongside it. And we learn that it isn't all bad when you think about it from the perspective of grieving your person and those feelings of pain and loss and sadness. What are those? That's love. It's just it's just recycled love. And I wouldn't want that to stop. So I'm perfectly content to sit alongside grief every day for the rest of my life because that means I'm sitting alongside my dad every day for the rest of my life.
This is I highlighted this because I thought this was so profound. The journey of surviving suicide loss without knowing the why isn't easy, but it's a journey that's taught me the importance of resilience, of community, and of continuing to ask the tough questions. I know the answer to my father's suicide may never come, and I know now that it's okay. It has to be, because it's not the answers that will ultimately help me heal, but rather the journey, the search for understanding, and the connections I make along the way. I
Mhm.
just can't think of all the people that need to hear that right there. Like, I think that's if there's something that I would think to say to so many people who have experienced that and have gotten stuck on that why and how do I live with that or how do I move on thinking like the why is going to provide this like relief or answer. And that part right there was just so profound. I mean, I almost call it poetic that you just talk about how like right there, I know the answer. My father's suicide may never come. I know that that's okay. It has to be. And like letting people know that that is because some people get stuck thinking that it won't be okay
I was stuck.
until I know it.
I was stuck, Andrew, for a long, long time. There's still a part of me, a part of my heart that will always, I guess, long for that answer. And that's because I'm a very linear personality. I like checks and balances. And this is a big thing to not be able to check off and understand. Not check off, that's maybe the wrong way to say it, but to reconcile with or to have the answer to. But I've actually started asking myself, how would it change anything if I knew what the why was? It wouldn't bring him back. I don't really think that it would do much to mitigate the pain. I think it would just simply be an answer to a question. And the one thing I have reconciled with is that sometimes you can't answer all the questions and you can still move forward. This is not about, nothing in this book is about moving on or reconciling or fixing or resolving. That is not what this is about. And I know you get it. I know you absolutely get it. But for anybody who's listening, I want to make it crystal clear that this is really about how to learn to integrate this into the rest of the fabric of your life because this grief and this loss is a companion now. It's there. It's there. It's going to be there. It's not going away. There's no end point. We don't resolve it. We just get, I think, a little bit more comfortable living alongside it. And we learn how to move with it. And it learns how to move with us. It's not just one way. It learns how to move with us because we get to decide how we react to it and how we respond to it. And if I'm having a really shit day and I just saw something that reminded me of my dad and it just triggers something, I am going to cry like a baby and not be the least bit apologetic for that. I mean, he's been gone 47 years. You don't think I go up into the White Mountains where I used to hike with him when I was a little girl? And when I get to a high hut where he and I camped, I will bawl like a baby in my little bunk bed, and then I'll have the best time being joyful with my kids that I'm in the place where my father and I were. So we learn how to make these two opposing things coexist, and we learn that grief and joy can live together. They can absolutely live together, and they're supposed to.
And one of the ways you do that throughout your book is you provide people with tools. And I was very curious to get your understanding from this because providing people with tools is a pretty common thing when you talk about like substance use treatment, how to what are your tools for coping with urges? When you are working with mental health, it's what are your tools for managing symptoms that you're dealing with? When we talk about grief, we sometimes seem to like think tools are I don't hear tools come up as much. I tend to see it where all of a sudden that grief is so hard and so heavy that these tools are just gonna get crushed and they're not gonna work. Like I struggle sometimes to hear people mention tools when it comes to grief because we think, well, they just need more time. They just need to, um, it'll take some time to get like we think that's going to be, and not, people have done this work and realize that that's not the answer, but that's sometimes like what we hear from like a culture, from a society, from like maybe friends or family that like what can you do except like time, right?
Wait,
But
wait it
it
out.
yeah, but in your book you mentioned tools of like how to the words matter. You put that in there. I'm a really big person on language and you talk about reframing. Like these are exact things that we are used to with like substance use, mental health, and other areas. And yet also when it comes to grief or it comes to something like suicide, with grief, we seem to think the grief is so powerful that these tools they ain't gonna do much.
Mhm.
But I think that's wrong. Like I think we're missing that. Once again, it's not to fix it or to move on from it, but the tools that you mention are things that are going to help people with their grief. But sometimes it seems like we get caught in this thinking that it's too powerful, and some people just tend to say, well, with time it'll get better. Like that's our one thing we always throw at it when why aren't we using these multiple tools that we also know we wouldn't not say to other people. We wouldn't say to someone else, well, with substance use, it'll just take time. Like just take some time and it'll get better. Or mental health, like, oh, well, just let it take some time and your mental health will get better. It's like, no, here's ways to manage it, cope with it. Here's tools to use. I feel like there's some big separation between like what we do with mental health and substance use that all of a sudden we think it won't work for grief and things like suicide. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just such a big proponent of tools to help you do the work, whether it's for substance abuse or generalized mental health or grief or loss or suicide. Look, at the end of the day, grief, especially a suicide grief, is incredibly debilitating. And I think, in all fairness, a lot of people don't even have the energy to open their eyes, the energy to get out of bed, the energy to have a conversation early on. And so I think sometimes in those cases, time is the best tool early on until you find your bearings. The thing that people don't realize is that the way that you're feeling right now about whatever it is that you're feeling, whether it's about your alcoholism or your drug use or a death you've experienced and you're grieving, all of those things, the feelings that you're feeling about that thing are not always going to be the way that you feel. Things will change, there will be a shift and sometime, and that's when there's a shift and people then have the capacity to utilize something like a tool, a mindfulness tool, for instance, or a journaling tool as another example. Once people have the energy, I think they're just depleted. I think that's why people don't often think of tools right off the bat with grief, but they're so powerful. And not every tool is right for every person or every circumstance or every loss. But I try to give people enough of them that they have a choice. Like, okay, what resonates with you? You're somebody who wants to go out and ground yourself in sunlight and in the earth every morning, and maybe that gives you a little bit of normalcy, or maybe a yoga practice, or maybe you're doing some somatic work and you're screaming it out, or you're putting it on paper and you're journaling, or you're listening to a guided meditation. I think you're right. I think that people don't often default to tools. And now that I'm kind of thinking that through on the fly while we're talking about it, I do think it's because people are just completely incapacitated by their grief. And initially, maybe it's just they just don't have the bandwidth for it. But I think that when people eventually kind of evolve into a different stage of grief, where, maybe they're capable of doing a little bit more, processing a little more, doing a little bit more work, I think that's when they can be so profoundly helpful. And as long as people recognize that there isn't like an end all be all tool. There are lots of tools that exist, and you have to do your own due diligence to figure out what might work for you, and that might mean trying a lot of them and being really unsuccessful with a lot of them until you find the one thing, the one tool, or the one resource that makes a difference. And that's what you lean into.
I think you put it together in such a delicate way that, like it's a tool like a hammer, but it could have like the weight of Thor's hammer, right? That's how
Mhm.
it could feel, right? Like that, yeah, it looks like it is a tool and we know that would be effective, but at the same time, how debilitating it could be or how devastating the loss could be is it's not as there's so much weight to it that this person is probably trying to do everything they can to lift it, but it can be so debilitating. My hope is that we would be in that space of meeting people where they are and continuing to know of the tools that are there, the tools that do work, the tools that it might not, one of my sayings is for now is not forever. So it might be today where that hammer feels that way, but like down the road, or it might be in the next session that it's not as heavy. So like then it might be something you can do. So I would hope there's like that balance of recognizing where someone's at, but also still offering the tools versus just thinking like, well, tools aren't going to work. So we just don't even let people know what's out there because I think with grief, we tend to wait too long to let people know about some of the tools, even if they're not ready yet to use it. Because we still do that even with someone who's dealing with other things, we still introduce them to tools, even if they might not be ready to do certain things. So I just wish we would do that a lot earlier. And I'm speaking from like a clinician side of things
Yeah.
that I think for me, like a big takeaway is to let people know ahead of time and right away about some of the tools and resources versus, well, let's wait for the time to get to that point where then they can use it. Like we still want them to know it's there and that they
Yeah.
can use it even when it's not in my space. Like might not be right now in this therapy session, but if all of a sudden this is going to help you when you're struggling on a Saturday night and you're by yourself, I want them to know that that's available.
Yeah. And I think that we have to, people have to be willing to put it out there. And then those of us who are grieving have to be willing to receive it without the expectation that, okay, you have to go use that right now. I think it's a shared responsibility of at least talking about it with people, informing people. Knowledge is power. Let people know what there is out there, and then they get to dictate the timing. It's all so subjective. What one person might do 3 months after losing someone is what it might take someone else 2 years to do. So it's all totally subjective, just in the same way that one tool may be great for one person and terrible for someone else. So I think that the bottom line to all of this is that we have to have the conversations. We have to be having the open conversation. And that includes how are you feeling and why? What do you need? What kind of resources are out there? What are you willing to try? What seems like it resonates? Like once we put all of these things kind of out there into the world and have the bigger conversations, that's when people are going to feel safe to explore ways, pathways to help them find hope and help them find healing. Like we never fully heal. I mean, the way that I think of my father's grief is it's a scar. It's a scar. We carry a scar. It symbolizes a wound. It may not always hurt the same way that it did the day we got the wound, but you can run your finger over it. And that memory sometimes is as powerful as the pain itself. So that's why, 20, 30, 40 years later, I can still cry like a baby when I see certain things that remind me of my dad. And that wound feels so fresh because I just ran my finger over the scar and I remember exactly what that, you never forget. Your body remembers, your mind and heart remember. And I think it's just important that we are all allowed to do this at the pace and in the ways that are best for us. There is no cookie cutter way through this stuff, but there is one thing that we all need to do, which is to go through it. You can't sidestep it. It will catch you every time. You can't outrun it. You can't ignore it. You can't finish it. And so I work on this with my therapist. If she were listening to this, she'd be very proud of me right now because we work on the concept of radical acceptance a lot. We talk about that as a theme that runs throughout my own personal therapy. And I've really, really tried to embrace it in a lot of different ways, not just relating to grief and loss, but more recently, definitely in relation to grief and loss. And definitely in relation to what we were talking about a little while ago about the why and the unanswered questions. Like I have had to use some big league uh, radical acceptance to navigate that. And at the end of the day, it's about accepting things for what it might be, what it is, and controlling what we have the capacity to control.
Two more questions before we wrap up.
Sure.
The way you sort of chapter 20 talks about the help hub, which is going to be my second question
Mhm.
to ask. But before that, you kind of really wrap up the story part of this with chapter 19 that there's always more to our story. And I thought that was such an incredible way of, you know, not just how to end a book, because this is also talking about how this doesn't end, that this continues. And part of it was even when we think we've already told our story, something new reveals itself in the retelling. A memory we buried, a feeling we finally name. That's the gift of revisiting our narrative with an open mind and open heart. And every time we revisit our story, we grow a little more. We soften where we once felt hardened. We forgive where we once held anger. And we expand in our ability to hold space for ourselves and others. That's another thing I say these things and I read these so that people can hear exactly some of these words because in my work I've done a lot with, substance use and overdoses. I've also done a lot of work with mental health and with suicide, where a lot of people, it's like the story stops. And we also know the power that some of these narratives can hold when it's, this person died of an overdose and then all of a sudden that becomes their entire narrative. It becomes that's the only thing about them versus, well, there's a lot more to them than just this. And even when we first started talking this podcast, you were mentioning like now this is a part of like even doing this with your dad, that like the story doesn't end,
No.
that the story continues. And part of it is, as you mentioned, that there's always more to it. When some of these things, people do feel like this was the end of a story, like their life ended, so the story ended. And that's another hard thing to talk about. And I know it's a hard thing to even process, but then you write about this at the very end, where it is so important that the story does continue and that the story, there's always more to it that we didn't realize or don't know. And I couldn't think of a better way to really end the book because it's an ending, but it's not an ending. It is a continuation, which it not all books feel that way because sometimes it feels like this is a conclusion, this is wrapped up, but like your very way of saying that this is the end of this is saying this is not the end of it.
That was very much by design, and you're picking out all of my intentional Easter eggs in this book, and I really appreciate that. You know, I think that the reason why, well, I know that the reason why I ended the book that way is because I've come to realize more recently in the last couple of years, and definitely because of work I've done in therapy, my relationship with my father continues to evolve. It continues to grow. And I didn't think much about that early on. It just was not something that I spent a lot of time reflecting on. And as I started this project and as I started feeling more and more like we were doing this together and then bring my mother into it, feeling like it was just this family project, I I really realized that my relationship with my father never stopped. It continues. I see more of him in myself. I see him in my children. I share things about my life with him. Sometimes I'll just write him a letter. Sometimes I'll be on a walk or on a run and I'm just talking to him. People must think I'm absolutely mad, crazy for just having a full-on conversation while I'm walking or running, talking to my dad. But I do it. And I I have a different kind of connection with him now, as any of us do with the people that we've loved, but they're not gone. As long as he's in my conscious thoughts, as long as I talk about him at the Thanksgiving table, as long as I say a silly story that he told me years ago, as long as he's here with me and through me, he's here. And we have the capacity, not just my dad and me, but anyone that any of us have lost, we have the ability to continue to grow that relationship. And it surprises me. It surprises me all the time, ways that I feel close to him, ways that I feel like I've engaged with him. And I love that. And I felt that the book needed to end in a way that expressed that that there is, we're all searching for hope, searching for hope. The book is called Finding Hope. And hopefully people do. But once you find it, that's not the end game. It's living within it. It's experiencing it. It's thriving. That's the end game. So there is no end game. Do you know what I mean? Wow. It's a continuation. And I really appreciate that you picked that out.
Yeah, I thought that was such an incredible way because I know so many people who struggle with that, who it seems like their story ended when their life ended, and then also the narrative around it when it's overdose or with suicide, like that narrative gets cemented sometimes, and like this is represents everything about this person. And then you talk about how that story continues and how it grows, and that I thought that's something that a lot of people need to hear or read or listen to when they do the audio. So last question before we wrap up, and it's not really a question, but it's more of the Help Hub because that's something you've had going for before this book was published. Um, and it's an amazing resource. And I wanted to tell you that this morning, when I was getting things prepared for, I look at the book again and I think of some things and I visited and I decided this morning that I added, your the Help Hub. I added it to my own personal website under resources.
I'm so excited to hear that. That just made my heart explode.
Yeah, so I wanted you to know that. I want that to be a thing for you to know. But tell listeners who have no idea what that is, what that resource is, because it's pretty unique. It's pretty incredible. It's very vast. And I think it's really important because it's also part 20, which is the chapter 20, which goes into what that is. So can you describe for listeners like what the Help Hub is?
Absolutely. And I appreciate the ask. It's it's a project, an ongoing project that I never intended to start. It happened very, very organically. So, what the Help Hub is, I'll tell you that first, and then I'll tell you the origin of it if you'd like. What it is a free online resource platform designed to meet anyone in any community exactly where they are with their mental health, with crisis support resources, with tools, with content, with treatment options. I have a beautiful partnership with the folks at recovery.com, and they filled a beautiful, beautiful void that I had within the Help Hub. I was offering all these resources and tools, but I didn't have any treatment options, and they came in and they are the treatment option provider on the Help Hub. So it's now, I feel, a very well-rounded resource for anyone who's just looking for resources or help or trauma-informed content. And it started, I think it really honestly started when I started volunteering as a crisis counselor with the Trevor Project. And the Trevor Project, for those who might not know, it's the largest LGBTQ suicide and crisis hotline in this country. And we service anyone really who calls. Of course, we'd never turn anybody away, but our main demographic is at-risk LGBTQ youth ages 13 to 24. And I've been on the Lifelines for about 4 years. And after about a year or two of being on the Lifelines and having all of these unbelievably powerful conversations with people in every community you could imagine, people in the AAPI community and the BIPOC community, and obviously the queer community and the elderly and veterans and parents, you name it, people who were all looking for support or resources or content. And one of the things that we do a ton of is safety plan, and we de-escalate, and we hold a lot of space on the Trevor Lifeline, and we also provide a lot of resources. And I was accumulating this incredible stockpile of resources, and I started seeing a pattern that every one of these resources in and of itself was an amazing resource. But there was no place, no one singular place under kind of one roof where you could go for anyone in any community to go and find the resources they needed. You would have to go to a specialized site for AAPI resources, or you would have to go to a special BIPOC site, or you would have to go to a Latinx site. But you couldn't go to one site that had any of those things, all of those things. So after lots and lots of research and trying to find that place that didn't exist, I built the place. And I just completely ripped my website down to the studs. All it really was a place to kind of, warehouse all the content that I create. And I just blew it up and I renamed it and rebuilt it. And if you go on to the Help Hub, the first thing that you land on when you land on the landing page is a grid. You kind of scroll down, there's a little opening message, and you scroll down, and there's a grid of, I think now we have 18 different categories: workplace, mental health, and treatment options, and all of the other categories I mentioned, and so many more. And you click on the category that represents who you are and the community that you belong in, and resources that are tailored to your unique needs are within that category. I'm only one person, so I wish I could capture every resource there is out in the world, but I vet every single one of there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of resources on the Help Hub, and I have vetted every single one of them, and I continue to add them on a regular basis when people reach out to me and tell me that there's a great new resource. And it really, by design, is a place that puts the help that someone might need, whatever that help is, a click or two away. Because when you're in crisis, and you know this as a counselor, when a person is in crisis, the last thing in the world they have the capacity to do is critically think about, well, where do I have to go right now to find the resources that I need, and who can I trust, and what's vetted and what's not. Like, you just need to know that there is a place where you can go and that work is done for you, and all you do is just click on the thing that you need. So the Help Hub is a very fluid directory of all types of resources and crisis support and tools. And hopefully it's organized in a way that makes it very easy for someone to come in and find what they need. And I have a podcast as well called The Survivors. Myself and my co-host Natasha Layton, we have lost combined 8 people we love to suicide. She lost 5 of her brothers to suicide, has had her own multiple attempts, is a survivor of sexual abuse and domestic violence. And so together we talk about all the different ways that we can survive in the world. And that's piped into the Help Hub and an archive of tools, downloadable, printable, shareable tools that I've curated, everything that I've written, all my books, um, and all sorts of content that relates to what I've gone through and my lived experience, and hopefully things that will empower other people to seek out the help in the community that they need.
And we'll make sure that's one of the exact resources we have for listeners to have access to in podcast notes and where this will be available because it is also, you've been doing a lot of this work even before you wrote the book,
Mhm.
and you're going to be doing still a lot of it even after with the book being done. And that's one of the areas to continue to stay in touch and know what's going on with that hub that you built.
Mhm.
So definitely want to ask about it and have you tell the story, but also know that I made that decision today to put that on my website as a resource for people to go to on this very topic. So thank you for having that.
I appreciate that so much, Andrew. And to anybody else who might be listening, if you have, a work website or a personal website, or you're listening and you're a therapist or a clinician, please, please feel free to do exactly what Andrew did and embed the Help Hub if you think it's something that can support the people you're trying to support in the world. Please add it. You don't need my permission. Consider this conversation all the permission that you need. Um, and if you have resources that you don't see on the Help Hub, I'm constantly asking people, please email me. It's very easy to get in touch with me on the Help Hub. There's a Let's Connect button. Just reach out. Let me know if there's a resource that you don't see that you think people could benefit from it. I will absolutely add it to the Help Hub and try to just make sure that we capture as many of these resources as we can.
Amazing. Thank you so much for everything. This is, we could talk so much about this, and the time that we have doesn't always create as much space that we could for a topic of this. So, final message, anything you want to let listeners know? We will have ways for them to connect with you, to learn more about what you do. Any final takeaways for them?
I think I would keep it simple and just say that help is out there. And there are people I know, because I talk to them on Lifelines, who don't feel like they have anyone. They don't feel like they have any community or family or support system. There are places and platforms and organizations and people like me who are out there who are willing to help, who are willing to listen. So seek us out because you're not alone. You're never alone, and there is always going to be someone out there who is going through some version of what you're going through. So when we go through grief and loss and suicide in particular, all of these things can be so isolating, and we feel like we're the only ones, and we're not. And this is just a reminder that we're not. And the only other thing I would say is what I've already said, but it's worth repeating. The way you feel right now, if you're in the thick of it, you will not always feel that way. Just honor where you are, meet yourself where you are, and there is another side. And you just have to get there on your own in the ways that you feel are best for you.
Thank you so much. And for joining, for the work you've done, for the book you published. I know there's going to be just so much more that you continue to do in this area, and it's so badly needed. And the balance you have, I think that's just something that stands out is you really show people how to sit with the grief and yet how to move forward with it. And you've done that through your book, through your work, through your speaking. And I think that is just such a profound gift that you share with everyone as to how to do with that. So I want to thank you again for joining. and we'll make sure everyone has ways to contact you and get to learn more about what you're doing. But really greatly appreciate the time you have given us on the podcast.
No, it was absolutely my pleasure. These are the kind of conversations that I live to have. And when I get to have one that's as good as this one has been, that's the end game for me. So I really appreciate you. Thanks, Andrew.
Wow, what a powerful episode with Lisa. Before you go, if today's conversation gave you something useful, something you'll carry into your work or your own recovery journey, I'd ask you to do one thing: leave a review on Apple Podcasts. It takes about 30 seconds, and it's genuinely the most powerful way to help this show reach more people who need it. Whether that's counselors, other clinicians, people in recovery, family members, or loved ones, and especially those dealing with grief. Scroll down the Apple Podcast app, tap the stars, write a line or two. That's it. I read every single one. Thank you for being here.
You've been listening to Talking Addiction and Recovery with Andrew J. Schreier. We're so glad you've joined us and invite you to connect further with the show and these topics at www.andrewjschreier.com. That's Andrew J. SCHREIER.com. You can also email us directly at talkingaddictionandrecovery@gmail.com and connect on social media, Instagram at Talking Addiction and Recovery, Facebook Talking Addiction and Recovery Podcast, and Twitter at TalkAR_podcast. To stay connected and never miss an episode, be sure to like, rate, and subscribe. Until next time, friends, let's keep talking addiction and recovery.